The next game on the list is yet another Namco title. However, unlike the two previous entries that were hits and became their own series, this one was not that well recognized and is considered to be a forgotten title. And that's game number 15, CyberSled, the first 3D vehicular shooter combat game for the PlayStation, and would be a sort of a precursor to Twisted Metal, published and developed by Namco. The story takes place in the year 2067, where a competition is taking place, where you go head-to-head combat, featuring armored vehicles known as Vehicle. For entertainment purposes, you choose 6 playable characters, which are Madison Hawk, Marie Yamamoto, Hans Braindead, Amanda Bates, Alan Stryker, and Rexer Ironside, each one having their own vehicle and their own different stats. After you choose the character, you compete in a battleground stage multiple times and have to shoot the other vehicle. Once you destroy all the opponent's vehicles, you go face off one more opponent, and that is the supreme champion of the tournament. Can you be the victor and win the tournament? Only one way to find out. Its development history is considered unknown, like always, but we'll talk about the arcade and its releasing schedule. So here we go. CyberSled started out as an arcade game back in 1993 in Japan and North America, then Europe in 1994, a year later. It had a very unique style, that is, everything was in polygons and were no textures on both of your vehicles and the arena, except for the skybox, which it does. The gameplay mechanics was very new at the time, and seemingly it was like Sega's Virtua Fighter, but with vehicles. And it ran on a Namco System 21 unit, the same one that was used for air combat. On its arcade release in Japan, Game Machine listed CyberSled on their November 1st, 1993 issue as being the second most successful upright arcade game of the year. This would eventually lead to home consoles, specifically enough the PlayStation. Originally, the port of CyberSled was intended to be a pack-in title for the PlayStation in North America, slated as a launch title, but Namco or Sony decided to delay it to October and instead put Ridge Racer as a pack-in title. Since it was a popular and a successful title in Japan, so obviously they do the exact same thing to North America as well, which it did and became a huge success just like they predicted, and also Europe too. But here's another thing that might be a shock to everyone, that CyberSled wasn't originally an exclusive title for the PlayStation, but was going to be a multi-platform release. Which one to be exact? The Sega Saturn. Why they did this? Well, here's the thing. Namco is sort of a gambler of seeing if a console does a successful enough to releasing their titles. Some did have hits and released games like the NES, Super NES, Genesis, and surprisingly, TurboGrafx-16. But on the other hand, had some misses and only released one game like the Sega CD and 3DO, which both of them were just ports of STARBLADE. So it was a risky move to see if either the Saturn or PlayStation are worthy enough to receive the port. But after the release of both consoles, the Saturn version was ultimately scrapped due to low sales and a surprise, but also an abysmal launch. Namco chose the PlayStation and thus the port was made. As for Sega, Namco never made a single game for the Saturn, but it wouldn't be its last, since they did release 4 games to Sega's last console, the Dreamcast, which they are Mr. Driller, Miss Pac-Man, Maze Madness, Namco Museum, and their most popular title for the Dreamcast, Soul Calibur. When the PlayStation port was released in Japan on October 13th, 1995, North America in October 18th, 1995, and Europe in November 27th, 1995, it was not a huge hit unlike the previous Namco titles. On release, Famicom Tsushishin scored the PlayStation version of the game a 29 out of 40 and giving it an 8 out of 10 in their Reader Cross review. GamePro criticized it for its lack of originality and unimpressive graphics, saying it looks like something you could have played on a 16-bit system, but concluded that it's fine, fast-paced fun, especially in the 2-player mode. And last, Next Generation reviewed the PlayStation version of the game, rating it 2 stars out of 5, and stated that this title didn't need to come home at all. But if you're an absolute die-hard fan of the original coin-op, the 1-player mode is a close match. Another thing that didn't do as well is the cover art. Why? Well, here's something a bit of a fun fact. The first 5 Namco games for the PlayStation, which is the game I'm reviewing, but also Ridge Racer, Air Combat, both of them I already reviewed, Tekken and STARBLADE Alpha, all 5 of them shows a person being shocked at the images they're all about to play, which were featured in the back of the front cover. It also includes these 5 and the faces in a booklet showing off their ultimate 32-bit system that had an unfair advantage to the other consoles. And at last is the front cover arts, that do resembles the game for the most part in all 3 regions. But for CyberSled, we didn't get this cover art in North America. Instead of this cover that resembles the actual game, we got the face as the front, which confused gamers, thinking that it was like a horror game even though it was rated KA for kids to adults. Like seriously, what were the people who brought the game to the US thinking? It should have been the back of the front cover, not in the front cover, but oh well then, their loss. Oh, and by the way, this is going to be a recurring theme of North America having the worst cover arts. And trust me, we'll come across some bad and weird front covers if they're worth enough mentioning it. Right now, let's get on to the review portion. The graphics looks fine and decent enough. They added textures to everything so it could be updated to the original arcade, which had no textures. But if you kinda prefer the original arcade style of just polygons, there is an option to set from real to original. Unfortunately, it only does that to the vehicles, and not the backgrounds. However, when you play on 2-player mode, all the textures had been removed due to the limitation, meaning you have the real true version of the arcade original, even though it does flicker most of the time. The presentation is alright. They put in some FMV which was not from the original, like the intro, character introductions, the game over screen, and the endings. And another thing that was added is the mode to have the time limit either on or off, depending if you want it to feel like the arcade. Also, the difficulty to normal to expert. And last, a first-person view by pressing select. Nothing else to say, but a neat feature. The music is great. Even though there are not that many, I still enjoyed it, no doubt. They even added new or remixed songs from new levels, but wait until the gameplay part, which so happens to be right now. The controls feel off. In the original arcade version, the controls were 2 joysticks for each side and 2 buttons, one to fire and the other one to launch a missile attack. But the conversion to joysticks to a controller is sort of a weird position, with the strafing are at the L and R buttons. But the fire and missile buttons are at the X and O, meaning I could do a special attack to damage the enemy vehicle. The levels are fine and have this distinct arena tone to it, but unfortunate, there are only 4 stages in the single player mode. I know this was in the original too, but I mean, come on, can you at least put 4 more stages in the game? Well, actually they did add in 4 more stages, but you can only play those in the multiplayer mode, which I'm just so confused of why they didn't put them in the single player mode. Besides, there are only 10 rounds and a final boss. But wait, you say. Didn't you say that there were 6 players to choose? Why yes, I did. But they add in 5 new characters that, like I said again, are not from the original, which they are Roger Wolfgang, Dr. Hinitz, Victor Rodriguez, Sifili Chrysler, and Kiritaro Kanemura. All can be accessed by beating the game once, or by entering a cheat code. But even with the new characters and making the rounds to 11 instead of the original 6, it's still too short, and even gets a bit repetitive after seeing the same stages over and over again, which sadly falls under the radar too good. Not bad, but it's in the decent or okay category. Now onto the conclusion. The gameplay's alright. I do like the new features they added in compared to the original, had a good soundtrack, and overall a great presentation. But the only thing that's lacking is the controls and the interest of keep continuing onwards. I'm not saying it's a bad thing in general. I know they tried their best of making this better than the arcade, but at the end of the day, sometimes it just feels flat and have to move on. This would not be the end of the series because they made a sequel called Cyber Commando, which plays just like the first but with enhanced graphics and visuals. But it was only released in the arcades in Japan only, and after that the series died and was never heard from again. Although CyberSled did get a virtual console release, but it's just only the original arcade version and not the PS1 version. Anyways, which is just a shame. Even with its repetitive gameplay, I still think it plays decent and was a major debut of the vehicular combat genre, which would inspire by another game, but made from a different publisher and developer, which you already know, Twisted Metal. But more on that another time. As for this game, it's rather decent and overall okay. I give my official rating a 3 out of 6. Next time on the PlayStation years, we return to Midway and tackle the first wrestling game ever made for the system, from a little help of the World Wrestling Entertainment, formerly known as the World Wrestling Federation back in the 90s. What is that game? Well, I'll tell you in the next review. Thanks for watching.